Hello everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and a tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DriveThruRPG review, my written and video review series. We take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at DriveThruRPG.com. With this video, we'll be reviewing the mini-adventure, The Secret of Stranglelight Hall, designed by MT Black for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my content, consider using my affiliate links for online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/Rogue Watson. I've reviewed several of MT Black's adventures over the years, and they all have a very distinct style, which, first of all, is compiled like an e-zine, like almost a pamphlet. It uses kind of these smaller size pages, and it's it's all black and white art. It's black and white maps, but the look of it still looks very, very professional and attractive for that particular style. So I love the fact that it doesn't just try to crib the usual, we're going to use the sepia tone and it looks like it's pulled right out of the, 5e books and everything. This has its own distinct style, and I think it works very, very well. Unfortunately, I always ding him on the maps because I am somebody who always prefers to have, actual maps I can use in a virtual tabletop and not just something that's written on a graph paper. And it's especially bad when your entire adventure is a dungeon crawl, which is a lot of what MT Black designs. Now, I happen to generally like Black's dungeon crawls for the most part. I think they do a really fun job of almost like an old school dungeon. There's a lot of really neat, traps and puzzles and interactive elements everywhere, and obviously some interesting combat setups. But it feels very much like a room-to-room dungeon crawl. This one is I guess I would call it a Magic Mansion genre dungeon crawl. It's large too. It's like over 20 rooms. It's optimized for 3rd level, but it does include adjustment levels for all the little encounters for levels 1 through 4. So solidly tier 1, which I think is pretty much what he usually does for his wheelhouse. It takes place in his fantasy world of Iskandar, which I actually did review the source book earlier this year of his own fantasy world, but obviously this could take place anywhere because it's a magic mansion. It just takes place anywhere. There's a town that could have a mansion that's technically not haunted, but there's weird magic stuff going on there, and essentially the wizard of the mansion has gone missing. They haven't been seen in a couple months, and the adventurers are hired to go see what's up. And that's unfortunately basically the only real plot we get. And this is something that I've kind of had a problem with some of Black's work in the past, is that they're very, very light on story, which can work okay if the dungeon has a good enough balance between combat exploration and role-playing, which previously I thought the dungeons usually did an okay job at. This one, to some extent, I thought goes hard on the exploration pillar, and the store description page literally says, I wanted to go hard on the exploration pillar because that's something that's often overlooked, which that's true. I would argue that dungeons, by their very nature, are already the best at doing the exploration pillar, because by your very nature, you're walking through, you're interacting with things, the DM's reading you descriptions of every single room. There's usually like some environmental storytelling as you build up what's going on. Like, that's all exploration pillar, and you're checking all those things off. But this one really lacks social component. There's like really no opportunity for role playing beyond that first chapter, where thankfully there is a little bit of a town that we get to interact with. The whole first chapter is, getting to talk to the NPCs, which I do appreciate that. I like that there's, the NPCs have these nice little descriptions, and we at least have some interactive element that's role-playing with the characters. But there's just not a lot of story development here. I mean, the only real plot is like this wizard has gone missing, and her servant that she sends to come out and like buy things for has also not been seen, so we're worried, so please go check it out. It does include adventure hooks for what it's worth, which previous stuff I've reviewed MT Black didn't even include that, so that's certainly a step in the right direction. The background is this whole thing about this trickster god has been giving almost like a warlock, I guess, maybe it is like a warlock situation, giving powers to upstart wizards, and then in the promise of like he'll make them immortal, and then he makes them immortal by essentially transforming them into will-o-wisp after a certain amount of time. It's like 20 years or something. This one and the latest wizard who has that power has found out that that's her fate, and she tries to change that by binding him, summoning up this god, and of course her hubris gets her in trouble, and she ends up being like bound to a lantern or something. It's still in the house, but there's no story for the players to uncover here. There's nothing like there's supposed to be like this whole area is haunted by will-o-wisps, and there's this. And I was kept picturing, okay, there's gonna be like this big reveal, and you're gonna uncover the mystery of the wisps and figure out like, oh, these wisps are really people that have been transformed by this guy. None of that actually matters, which I found hugely disappointing. It really is a very straightforward dungeon crawl. I mean, it's pretty easy to run, which is handy, but I really need just a little bit more plot and story to make things more compelling for my players. But on the other hand, if that's not as much of a concern for you, then I think we actually have a really solid, well-built dungeon. And let's face it, DM can make this into a really cool story by just adding some interesting elements here and there. The actual dungeon crawl, I think, works very well in terms of the events and all the things that players can do. I would insert a few more social things and try and come up with a better idea with the use of all these wisps and the trickster god and all that, instead of just it being a classic like, hey, the final boss is just waiting for you in the room, and when you get there you fight the boss and then you're done with the dungeon. But as I said, the actual dungeon crawl is very cool. The map, not so much. It's sorry, I just don't like the style at all. It's the black and white graph paper map. We do get a separate image version of this without the numbers on it, so I guess you could use it as a player map, but it is just the same art style, which is not a nice map art that I could use as a virtual tabletop. I will, however, praise this encounter summary page on the next page. However, I don't think I've ever seen another adventure do this, which is to say up front, hey, DM, here's what I've got stocked in this dungeon, itemized by creature and treasure. That's really handy, especially for a relatively large dungeon like this, which is over 20 rooms. And this lets me see, okay, approximately how many enemies are in this room and what kind of treasure is in this room. That is really cool and just incredibly helpful for the DM, I feel like, to be able to have all that organized in one table. So super thumbs up to that. I don't think I've ever seen another adventure actually do this. And now I want all of them to have this because that's very, very helpful. So I can go over briefly, well, not briefly, but I'll talk about like what all the things that occur here, which I think is pretty fun. A lot of fun little traps, not quite like, Tomb of the Nine Gods, but maybe like the Death House or I forget the name of the one in Ghosts of Saltmarsh where it's the haunted house, but like, things happening that are going to kind of fuck with the players a little bit. But this is, again, designed for third level, so you actually are fucking with them quite a bit. You're not just, illusory magic, but there's a chandelier that transforms into a swarm of poisonous snakes. There's a skull with these gem eyes that if somebody tries to grab it, the gems cast suggestion on that player, and the suggestion is to go swim in the pond outside of the mansion, which if the players haven't already inspected it, it's got this weird frog monster called a Vodnik there who will try to grapple people and drag them into the water. There's a classic, you sit down at a dining table and magical food appears all around you. And it's not all bad and it's not all good. There's a fun little combination of good and bad things that happen depending on what you eat, and the same thing in the laboratory too. The laboratory's got all these different elements that you can, drink different potions or, I don't know, smoke something or whatever, and then different effects will happen, all these different buffs and debuffs, or sometimes just funny things like you might burp butterflies or something. There is a compost heap in the larder, which is actually a shambling mound, which, by the way, shambling mound is a pretty high nasty threat to include as kind of a random one-off like monster. That's a CR5. That's actually stronger than what the boss is at the end of this one, so that's a little bit concerning. Domovoy are these little cute old men fairies that can kind of jack with the players, and they do a good job of doing the magic mansion thing where there's a lot of, there's magic paintings, there's the eyeballs that follow you around, and then there's, paintings that come to life. One of them is that her actual servant, the only other notable NPC in this whole chapter, is trapped in a painting, and I thought, okay, now finally we get a social scene, but she can't speak, and the only way she can do it is through communicate through gestures. But there's no information about, like, the players are probably going to want to communicate a lot of information, like how much charades can we play here, but there's really nothing here. It just says she knows of Orana's, which is the wizard's name, attempted summoning, but not what happened afterwards. We never get anything. There's no there's no real like journal that we can find. We can find Ferocia, which is the woman trapped in the paintings journal, but that doesn't have enough information. I just feel like it was very, very lacking in the story development. There's not a lot of environmental storytelling. It's just a lot of, I think it does hit that Magic Mansion theme pretty well, which is, you know, magic stuff happening. One of the funniest ones is in the, where is it? It's like the study. Okay, here's the lounge. There's a brass sign above the divan that says, "Beware of the mimic," and the sign itself is the mimic, which is funny because there's different items the players might think, oh, is that the mimic? Is that the mimic? But the sign itself is the mimic, and it will try to attack players. I thought that was really cute and clever, and I like that a lot. The magic paintings, there's a knight that pops out and attacks you with a magic sword, and he can summon, and he wants to duel somebody. There's a statue that's holding I think a staff of the python, which is a pretty legit item that's got its other hand open, so players can trade him, kind of almost Indiana Jones style. You can trade for a similar item or similar magic item, and he'll release the staff. If you try to take the staff, of course, he'll expel a bunch of gas that does bad things to you. There's a door knocker with the head of a Medusa on there, and of course, you try to break in there, it will turn somebody to stone unless you can put up a mirror, but only until you leave the dungeon, then they'll turn back to normal. There's a whole room that's just like a fancy animated map. The Solarium, and nothing in here actually does. It almost felt like those old school like Myst puzzles where there's like levers and things. And Tomb of the Nine Gods does this very well on one of the levels near the Gears of Hate. Where there's a lot of like fun levers, and you're trying to figure out, okay, what is the puzzle here? But there's no puzzle here. It's just these buttons all do different things to make this map animate, and it's just kind of funsies. But what's interesting about the way that that MT Black designed this dungeon, there is something to do in every single room of this dungeon, which is really impressive, and that definitely does a good job of checking that exploration box. The fact that none of these are just, hey, it's an empty storage room, or it's a broom closet or something. There's nothing in here. It's just like a little safe room, or like, and it's like there's always some of those, like even in the official, you know, D&D adventures, there's always just a couple rooms that are just empty bullshit nothing rooms. There's really nothing like that here. Now, you might have an example of actually the Solarium does have treasure. It's got a gem of brightness in it. So there's something, there's either a trap or a hazard, or, you know, some button you can push, or something that you can do. There's of course, there's multiple like secret staircases around. There's, you know, you pull a book. One of them is the library. There's a bunch of books flying around. They're harmless, but then the one book on the shelf, you pull that because it's not a real book, and then it opens up the secret passage. I was really impressed by just how interactive this mansion is, and it honestly reminded me of playing a like old school point and click adventure game, or a look and find adventure game or something, where there's just something on every single screen that you get to play with. Now there is combat. There's, you know, you saw that beginning page. There's, you know, there's a shambling mound. There's a mimic. There's that knight that duels people. You know, level 3. So there's not a whole bunch of nasty stuff here. There's that Vodnik out front. I'm trying to think about what else is here. The swarm of snakes from the chandelier. Oh yeah, there's an ochre jelly. Later on, there's a room you open that's like a fake illusory forest that seems to go on forever. And the whole time the players are trying to figure out the illusion, and there's stuffed animals and stuff. And then there's just an ochre jelly waiting on the ceiling ready to attack. So the thing about a Magic Mansion, you don't have to really worry about the ecology of the dungeon so much. Like these things don't have to, because it's all just magically, you know, created, and things have been haywire. And even then, it's the reason behind it is the trickster god has kind of turned the tables on the person that tried to capture him, and so he's, you know, just screwed up a lot of things in there. So you can get away with a lot of these wacky designs of these things that are kind of almost like a death trap dungeon, where it's designed to harm the players, you know, room to room, or just give them something to interact with. And for that reason, I think it does do a very cool job. You know, they can get magic items in some room, or just survive traps, or, you know, fight these battles. But honestly, the dungeon felt very fun to explore, and I think that is pretty good praise, especially for a relatively large dungeon. It doesn't try to block the boss room off, which is always a tricky thing with these open-ended dungeons. I really respect the open floor plan dungeon design, but with a caveat, right? Because you want to give your players a chance to explore. You don't want to just do, okay, you're going to this room, this room, this room, this room. That's not really good exploration. Even though you're reading descriptions, there might be things to do in the room, but unless you let your players take charge, like, no, we want to go this way, or we want to split the party and have you guys go this way, you guys go this way, that's good exploration. And this one does do that very well. On the other hand, the balance is, how do you prevent the players from just waltzing into the boss room in the third room, and then it becomes very anticlimactic to try and do the rest of the dungeon after you've, you know, done the boss. It's the Legend of Zelda problem, right? Where you've got like the boss key you have to find, and that's something I think I've done in my dungeons too. Is like, no, and I've reviewed a lot of dungeons that do that, where they kind of gate off that last room. This one doesn't try to do that at all. Interestingly enough, you wouldn't know where to go. It's the attic is where you have to go ultimately. So you'd at least have to make it up the stairs to the second floor, and then you'd have to find the stairs to the attic, which I believe are located in the bedroom in the corner. But you could conceivably make it there in just a couple rooms. So it's a tricky problem to have. And this one I'll mention the fact that it doesn't try to slow down or stop the players from going up there and engaging with the finale, which the whole time you really don't have any idea what's going on. You might have played a little bit of charades with the servant, and you might have found her journal, which maybe teased something about she was in a bargain and tried to get out of something. But there's really, you're not really learning much here other than just, oh man, this place is crazy and dangerous. And then when you finally get to the last place, you see that she's kind of been trapped in this magic lantern. Not really a will-o-wisp, but I guess kind of a between. And the trickster god is there, like in the pentagram. And this, I will say, is a fun, interesting boss fight. So you're not fighting the god, obviously, himself. But he's there present as kind of a illusion, I guess, and he summons up a boss creature that you do fight, which is the DM calls it a mock serpent, the designer. And then every round, which I guess kind of works as layer actions at that point, then the trickster god does a thing that's pretty fun and funny, like you talk too much to a spellcaster and they have to make a save or else they can't cast spells anymore. Or he says, oh, do you like carrots to the sword wielder, and their sword turns into a carrot, but it's really an illusion, which they can, try to make a check against using their investigation check. So that's really fun and unique because it's, you have to keep it still relatively low level, but I think adding that effect on top of having a boss fight is really interesting and cool, even though I think the Mock Serpent stats are probably not very high for a 4-player team of level 3s. Certainly not even as good as the Shambling Mound, but having this extra effect, what I would do is almost treat it more like legendary actions and instead build it to where he can do those things multiple times in combat and not just like once per round. And there are extra, here we go, the appendix, more tricks for Zart being the trickster guy. A whole bunch of new things the players can do, like grappling them by splinters. He sneezes and a bunch of his little heads roll around and can knock people prone. He says nice belt, and a person's belt turns into a snake that tries to wrap around their body. A whole bunch of just like extra effects that can attack people. And he, by the way, you can't attack him. He's just present as like this hologram essentially. So he's just fucking with you the whole time during this final fight, which I think is amazing. And that is a memorable moment in this campaign. That he can have those extra effects during this boss fight. Again, I would probably treat it like legendary actions, so they're happening more often instead of just a once per round layer action. But I do think that's a pretty cool boss fight. And that's pretty much it. So I think it does a great job with the actual dungeon crawl, but it's really lacking when it comes to the story development, which is a bummer because, you read the background and you thought, okay, cool, there's a whole story about this trickster god tricking people and turning them into will-o-wisps, and this one wizard tries to break out of it. Like, how is this gonna play out in this dungeon? And then it just doesn't really play out at all, and we're just kind of in it for the fun magic dungeon crawl. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for the Secret in Stranglelight Hall. Pros: a 20+ room mansion dungeon with something interesting in every room. Every single room. It doesn't necessarily have a battle in that room, but it might have a magic item to discover, or a secret thing to pull, or just weird things happening, like the books flying around, or the dining table where you can choose to eat some stuff and not choose to eat others. And that's really cool if one person eats this and one person drinks this and these different effects happen. They're like, oh, what happened to you? Those are fun moments, even though there's no trap, there's no monster, there's nothing of that. So I thought it just did a great job making this really a great treatise on dungeon design, is trying to have something in every room, which is pretty challenging. Pro: a unique boss battle against the trickster god. I kind of just ended with that in my review, but I thought that last battle was pretty compelling, even though level 3, the creature itself, which the stat block is included at the end, didn't seem too impressive, but I did like the added effect of all the little ways that trickster god kind of screws with the players and has all these different effects that happen. It felt very thematic and very interesting. Pro, this encounter summary table right here that provides an easy at-a-glance of all the creatures and treasure in the dungeon. I absolutely freaking love this, and I want this to be on all dungeons forever and ever going forward. I think it was just awesome to be able to see instantly, hey, what creatures and what treasure can we find in this dungeon? What does the balance look like at a glance? And Pro encounter adjustments levels 1 through 4. I believe only on the combat side, but every time there's a battle, and if it's, you know, hey, the player's a level 2, then it says, okay, reduce this person's hit points and they only attack with like minimum attacks or something. Or if it's, you know, even if they're level 5, then you can go harder and maybe increase the hit points or something like that. I do always like to see those encounter adjustments. Cons, one of them you're looking at on the other page, which is the black and white graph paper dungeon map. That is a huge bummer in any adventure regardless, but especially when your entire adventure is the dungeon crawl. And I just can't get excited looking at this map, and I can't use it for virtual tabletop. It sucks. It really sucks, and that really brings the whole thing down. It really honestly would have elevated it to probably just pure recommendation had this been a really gorgeous map design. I would have been totally seduced by it. But the other con, which is not part of the map art design, is that it's a bare bones story with very little actual story development. Even when you defeat, you know, the trickster god's little avatar, and he's like, ah, and he goes away, and then you free her, and she's just back to normal, and she's like, okay, thank you for saving me. It's like the end. It's just, there's nothing, I don't know, there was no good compelling reason for doing this, or it just, even, you know, even a side quest, I feel like, which obviously all these little mini adventures are, could still make me care and get invested about the different steps that happen in the story, and this one just really drops the ball in that regard. Final verdict, the Magic Mansion in the Secret of Stranglelight Hall is stuffed with fun ideas and interactive elements. The lack of plot development and social encounters holds it back from being a more memorable dungeon crawl. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. And you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Shouts to Platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Thomas, Adam, Stan, William, I'm Loud, Kyle, Brandon, Genocider, David, Nebula99, Eclectic, Role Player Roll, James, and Lindsay. And gold patrons: RPG Papercrafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcus, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Nathan, Fassica, Tortoise, and James. Thank you all very much for your support.